Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 18th of March 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we will be joined by live video link by David Scott, reporting north of the border with northern exposure. Well, the weather, it is glorious here in Plymouth. We've got good reports for Devon. Apparently the Isle of Man is very sunny, but a little bit gloomy across Norfolk, London, Manchester, and for David there in Perth. So are we worried?
No.
No. What we are worried about is the state of the country, the state of the nation. And before we get into the main part of the news, I'll just bring up this very, brace yourself. Yes, it's Tony Blair. A lady sent me this YouTube clip, which of course is Blair in the very early days. And he was getting hot under the collar, saying it was a battle really of reformers versus wreckers. That is the battle for this parliament, and it's one we must win. Of course, what was really going on is that the reformers were the wreckers. And this was Tony Blair destroying not only the Labour Party and Old Labour, but his job was to get in and destroy every part of British public services and institutions, a job which Gordon Brown and now David Cameron are continuing. So we'll just leave that as a thought in your mind as Mike and David move you through the state of the economy.
Well, the fallout on the budget continues, and this time it is the Liberal Democrats that are pushing this idea that the budget includes £650 million in secret cuts to the NHS. And this article here in the Independent saying changes to public sector pensions will leave NHS employers with a hefty bill that will come out of services. Research compiled by the Liberal Democrats suggests £650 million was taken out of the health service by changes to public sector pensions that leave employers fielding extra costs. And the Independent reporting that Tim Farron said that Osborne had made grand promises about funding the NHS and is now making secret cuts by the back door. He's saying that that Osborne cannot pull the wool over people's eyes. Choosing to ask schools, hospitals and forces to pay £2 billion extra in pension contributions has a real cost, and vital services will have to pick up the bill. Well, of course, we've shown this so many times now. I'm sure everybody's bored of seeing it, but this is only part of the picture, and Tim Farron not giving people the whole story. We have this massive black hole in state pension and public pensions. We're seeing the headlines of people having to work until they're in their 70s, and we're seeing more cuts to the NHS immediately, it seems, in order to try to compensate for this. But nobody is actually dealing with the actual problem. So Osborne has no choice, or does he? Since perhaps this article gives us a clue. This is the Telegraph, and they're saying inheritance tax windfall for the Treasury. After winter death rates soar, the government will benefit from an extra £200 million this year after the number of people paying inheritance tax increased, and they're saying that the Treasury is expecting to net that £200 million after an unexpected flu virus, the impact of an unexpected impact of the flu virus this year. So we had a mild winter, and apparently that led to lots of people dying from the flu. Well, or does it? Because actually the vaccine take-up this year was pretty good, 71%, more or less the same as last year. We had a mild winter last year as well, but we didn't seem to have the same effect. So the question is this the virus or is it the vaccine?
Well, in my opinion, it's the vaccine. We almost see a holiday atmosphere outside GP surgeries as elderly people are encouraged to have the vaccine jab. Still no signed paperwork by doctors to say it's safe. And of course, the other thing they're pushing for at the moment is shingles vaccinations. So that's another load of chemicals to be pumped into people's bodies. And don't forget, of course, that David Cameron has set those dementia targets. 2 million people must be certified with dementia by 2050 or thereabouts, and doctors paid to make those diagnoses.
And then following on from our comments about the budget yesterday, this put a smile on my face because this is the government's, the Department of Trade and Industry, tweeting out that Cuba needs extra input to meet its energy needs, and they're proposing that British businesses get into exporting energy gear to and generating equipment to Cuba, because Cuba can't generate its own electricity. And let's just remember what was the point that was made in the budget. Our generating capacity supposed to be around 80 gigawatts in this country, and the Chancellor announcing in the budget that he was going to be importing, on top of this lot of imports of energy, he is now going to be importing another 9 gigawatts to try and meet the energy shortfall that we have in this country. So 9 gigawatts of new imports of energy. So he's busy trying to persuade people to export energy to Cuba, but he doesn't seem to be able to encourage British companies to invest in energy in this country.
Yeah, the normal hypocrisy,
Absolutely.
I think we'll say.
So this was an interesting article in the Times. This is Saeed. What's his first name? Wafik Saeed. Billionaire philanthropist, arms dealer. Of course, he was a friend of Tony Blair's, involved in the Al Yamama arms deal in Saudi, which the Serious Fraud Office mysteriously lost all the documentation for. And apparently Barclays Bank, this is pot calling kettle black here.
It's obviously too hot to handle.
It must be. Barclays Bank has told Saeed that it no longer wants him as a customer, so they've told him to go away. And this is pretty disappointing for his foundation, because, of course, they don't have a bank account anymore, and they are going to have to look for another bank to take them on.
Don't forget he's linked into the Said Business School at Oxford University, training the great and good. So we've got a billionaire philanthropist, former supposedly arms dealer, training the great and good in this country.
Well, in fact, the Daily Mail was pointing out that the Said Foundation has used Barclays for 20 years, and it counts Sir Michael Peat, former private secretary to the Prince of Wales, and Lord Powell of Bayswater, Margaret Thatcher's former advisor, among its trustees. So clearly a very reputable organisation.
Or not. And some links in with Common Purpose as well. We'll have a look at that in more detail. Well, let's remind people that, of course, the Chancellor stood outside waving his red briefcase, flanked by Jim O'Neill, Goldman Sachs banker. Here he is circled in red. This was pointed out by Guido Fawkes. There's another picture of him there, just so that we know. Thank you very much to the person who said, well, Brian, you need to have a look at the European Central Bank, because Mr. Draghi here, of course, is also a former. They're all former, and then they drift back into the Goldman Sachs job. And we pointed out that at Bilderberg last year, there was another 2 Goldman Sachs bankers, including Mr. Sutherland, who's the man very big on getting immigration going across Europe. And we also pointed out that Mr. Carnage, as Mike prefers to call him, Bank of England, is also Goldman Sachs. And it seems to us that Britain's finances and economy are being run, or collapsed is the better word, isn't it, by foreign bankers collaborating with Parliament. So have we got a Westminster for the British? I don't think so. I think this is a banking cartel, Mike.
I think collaborating is not really fair. Pulling strings, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay, where are we going to next? Is this David? I believe it is. David, IMF backs unconventional monetary policies despite warnings from emerging economies.
Yes, the emerging economies are suffering, as so many people are. In fact, everyone who's not well connected is suffering from such things as negative interest rate policy, zero interest rate policy, and unlimited money printing. This simply is a transfer of wealth from the unconnected to the connected, and is stealth theft, and it's been generated by our central bankers and by the cohort of bankers in the cartel, people like Goldman Sachs, foremost amongst them.
So, give us a bit more on what the IMF's up to here.
Well, the IMF is going now. it's completely unprecedented. You have negative interest rate policies and money printing policies the world over. We've never seen anything like it. And we'll see in a moment how poor their ability to predict the future is. So they're saying on the one hand, trust us, we will turn this around. We simply need more debt, more money printing, and money printing is always taking value, taking purchasing power from existing supplies of money. So people in fixed incomes, people like pensioners, sovereign wealth funds, anything that has got a store of value is having that store robbed, and the value, the worth has been transferred to those who receive the benefits of the government and central bank handouts.
So as you say, the IMF making some interesting forecasts here. Let's just have a little bit closer at the actual graph here.
This is possibly the funniest graph I have ever seen. What it shows here is the IMF's view of the future. Right, so you see there in 2011, right, the economy was tanking and it predicted stabilization and growth, and we got more tanking. 2012, we predicted rapid recovery and growth, and we got it flatlining. And then 2014, we were predicting growth and fairly rapid recovery, and then flattening out, and the economy went down, and we are now told that don't worry, we're predicting it's going to improve. So the one thing that you take from this is do not ever trust a prediction from the IMF. They're okay at predicting the past. They can tell you how bad it's been, but if there's any prediction regarding the future, then don't trust it if it's from the IMF.
But sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry if I may, David, is there a bit of nudging here? Is that they know full well that ultimately that line is going to go downwards, tank downwards to the financial collapse. So you keep putting a completely false upward curve to the line to fool people in thinking that there isn't a financial collapse going on.
I honestly wonder how much that's the case. Some of these people, I think, are true believers. If you look at the current head of the Fed and Mark Carney and what have you, do these people actually believe what they're selling? I suspect, and it's a horrible prospect, I suspect that they do. If you look back to Alan Greenspan, as soon as he left the Fed, before he joined the Fed, he was a hard money gold bug. And then when he was employed to say something else, he said something else. And as soon as he left the Fed, he went back to his much more sensible beliefs. So some people are simply putting a line, and they know full well that it's harmful. Some people, I think, actually buy this, because the education in the realms of economics is so confused. If you come through a major university studying conventional economics, you will believe 1,000 impossible things before breakfast.
Like the interest rate is going to what?
Yes, interest rate graphs are also getting quite funny. I loved the one that was on a T-shirt, the Great Interest Rate Hike of 2015, which showed interest rates over a longer period and they're plummeting down, flatlining in this tiny little upward blip, which you see there. And again, you see this is the prediction, and the prediction is consistently wrong.
So basically, RBS is no better than the IMF.
No, I don't suppose RBS are any better than the IMF. I think you're probably right there. And we have a situation where the Fed in America are still saying, well, we're going to raise interest rates this year, just not yet and not too fast, but we will raise them. Trust us, we'll raise them. And meanwhile, the base rate for interbank lending is going negative, and there is zero sign of anything turning around. The next graph shows just how bad the UK government finances are. Now, this is I never thought I would see a chancellor as bad as Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown was a bad chancellor on an apocalyptic scale. He knew nothing about economics and was profoundly flawed in everything he did. The first 2 years after he got the job, he promised not to do anything because no one trusted the Labour Party. He didn't do anything, it went quite well. Then he started to do things and it went horribly. Now, as the effects of his horrible decisions were becoming more and more obvious, he kept repeating the same mantra that we're going to balance out the budget over the whole economic cycle. Now, it became increasingly clear this was not going to happen. He kept repeating it long after nobody believed it. And I'm astounded to say it, but the current Chancellor, Mr. Osborne, is doing exactly the same thing, because he's telling us he's going to go into surplus. Government is going to have a surplus in 2020 and forever thereon. Now look at the chart, right? You see this, it goes into surplus only very fleetingly, and that the size of the deficits are growing and growing and growing. That's systematic failure. That's a system in terminal decline. The post-war consensus, the welfare state, the whole thing is going to crash, and eventually they'll not be able to paper over the cracks with funny money.
And David, the key thing about this graph, because many people still don't understand the difference between deficit and debt, because the red lines represent how much overspend the government has had in each year. And so each time there's a red line, it adds to the debt. So where we see the blue lines, those are not periods where the government has not had any debt to pay. So that's the key point here.
That's right. The blue lines are paying off debt, and the red lines are adding to it. Yeah. So it's hugely cumulative and growing. Yeah. And not only does the forecast of Mr. Osborne look wildly optimistic that we can suddenly turn the thing round in the last year before an election. Yeah, that's when we're going to get the hardest austerity. The last year before the election, and suddenly we're going to be in surplus, but there will be no recession between now and 2020. That's wildly optimistic, and essentially no recession ever again, because we'll have wise hands at the tiller now. Trust us, it's fantasy.
So okay, if that's what's going on here, then what's Egypt up to?
Well, I put this in for comparison because this is quite interesting. This shows you some of the effects that are being seen in the third world. Here we have Egypt, which is the most populous Arab nation and the most economically dynamic, I think, it's fair to say. They're having to slash the value of the currency, the Egypt pound, by 13%, another 13%, one in a long line of devaluations against the dollar, because they're having a shortage of dollars. The dollar reserves are down to $16 billion, and for such a large country, that is not very much. And this is on top of another three depreciations of the currency last year. So they're chasing the currency to the bottom in a currency war against the West, having to compete against false returns on money in places like the London housing boom and property market boom. So that was sucking in money to places like London and New York. And Egypt is having to compete for finance on this extremely slopey playing field. So they're having to then slash the currency in order to compete. A couple of other things, they've put up their central bank base rate to 9.75%. No zero interest rate policy there, 9.75%, and the Egyptian government are paying nearly 8% for their money. So debt there is having a very severe effect. If we were paying 8%, we would be completely bust. We're paying almost nothing for the money, and it's still a very heavy burden on the taxpayer.
But in the meantime, Scotland's a third world country as well, isn't it?
Well, things aren't looking good. We had, I don't know if you caught the interview between Andrew Neil and Nicola Sturgeon. Andrew Neil was asking about the state of the Scottish Government finances if we were independent, because if we had voted yes for independence, we would be in the final stages of the negotiation, and Independence Day would be only weeks away. And we have a £16 billion hole in the government finances. And the question was, what would you do about it? And what Nicola said is, well, we would tackle the finance deficit, the budget deficit, the same way that Westminster has tackled its budget deficit. That's an interesting statement, because one, her party has opposed all of those moves. Two, I really don't think George Osborne is the model of financial prudence, and neither was his predecessor.
I know you're not allowed to use that word. Prudence, that's a Gordon Brown word.
Yes. Prudent and sustainable, wasn't it? Yeah, that was his policy. It was to use the words prudent and sustainable as often as was prudently sustainable. So Osborne, we'll need to come up with a word for Osborne. Lying, I think, is probably the word for Osborne. Osborne is trying to say that he's on top of things and it's all going to be fine, and we're paying down the deficit and we will pay down the debt. It's all a pretense. And Nicola Sturgeon had even less to say about how an independent Scotland would manage this. And this is a problem that will be faced by the entire Western civilization. It's not a British problem, it's not a Scottish problem, it's not a Greek problem, although there are specific Goldman Sachs related reasons why it was particularly bad there. It's a Western society, Western civilization problem. It's not sustainable, it cannot be sustained, there will be a reckoning, and it's coming.
And what was that image about then?
There is a American comedy sitcom called Parks and Recreation, which is set in the Parks and Recreation Department of local government. And this character here, called Ron Swanson, is a libertarian who works in the government but wants the government to fail and tries to do absolutely nothing. And there's a budget crisis, so he's so excited that he's going to get the chance to slash the budget. He makes penance and tries to persuade them not to cut 33% but 40%. And actually, that's the sort of attitude we need. We're looking at a situation in the West where very intelligent commentators such as Mark Faber, who sees the West from a worldwide global perspective, is saying, well, to stand a chance, you have to cut the state by 50%. And that's the sort of change we're looking at. And there is nobody in the political realm who will dare utter any of those words.
Because we live under feudalism now, of course, we've been talking about the establishment of feudalist city-states, but this was a great article in Zero Hedge.
It was very good, yes, and it's looking at how, yes, you are here. I like the you are here. Welcome to the feudal state. A lot of this comes back to the money printing and the unsound money system. If you look at long-term plots of the average income versus GDP, for example, or average income versus house prices, they move in lockstep. So society gets richer, the average man gets richer in proportion, and his life gets better in proportion, up until 1971. And there's a divergence. And what happened in 1971? The last vestige of the gold standard was eliminated. Nixon closed the gold window, and there was no longer any limit anywhere in the system to the funny money printing by governments, by central banks, by the banking cartel. And it's the banking cartel that generate most of the actual increase in money supply. That means that there is essentially wholesale fraud, and the people at the top of the tree, used to be monarchs, now it's bankers, are able to live at the expense of the work and labour and efforts of those further down. It's a system of exploitation.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Now, you were keen to mention this lady who you snapped from a little video clip. I believe she's an interesting person providing advice to the Labour government. Is that correct?
Yes, she is one of the inner group of 7 advisors to McDonnell, the Labour shadow chancellor, and I was struck by what she was actually saying. This was from Newsnight, the day of the budget, so it was commentating on the budget, and being a Labour advisor, she was asked briefly, well, what would Labour do? And she talked about, we got a few buzzwords out, and you know what it was? It was the Scottish model of government. It was everything we've seen up here. It was the entrepreneurial enabling state. It was a complete root and branch change of the entire relationship between government and people. So that's what's advising the Labour Party. So be warned when you eventually have enough of what is called Tory austerity, and which is, I would suggest, neither Tory nor austerity. When you've had enough of that and you get the next lot in, and if it's the Labour Party in the current direction, what you're going to get is something that looks very like what we've had in Scotland for the past 7 years under the SNP. And in terms of personal liberty and freedom from state oppression, it's not good.
Okay, so I just wanted to highlight this article now from Vanessa Bailey on her blog. Vanessa was in Geneva a couple of weeks ago giving a presentation to the United Nations on Saudi use of cluster bombs in Yemen. Of course, Yemen, the war that most people don't seem to want to talk about. So she was giving examples, images, and so on. Please go and have a look at that and distribute that as far and wide as you can. And then I came across this article in Waking Times this morning, Non-Compliance with a Broken System, Why I'm Not Voting. This is from Stephen Parato. He says, I don't own a TV, I don't watch the news, I don't pay attention to any of the bread and circuses. I'm too busy improving myself and those around me, but word on the street is that it's getting close to election time here in America. People ask me what I think about Donald Trump, and so it goes. Now, what actually he goes on to do is to describe what he would do for real change, and he says, wake up to the fact that everything being projected is one big theatrical illusion. Do the inner work, clear your demons, connect with love, practice small acts of kindness every day, start expressing your gifts, whatever they may be, watch society change from the inside out. And what I found from reading this really was that there was a lot of words discussing what he isn't doing and not very much discussing specifically what he is doing to sort out the problems that we see. And while many people would agree with his comments about the best things to do, of course, those aren't terribly practical steps to getting rid of what is effectively a dictatorship building, Brian. And really the point I wanted to make from this is we're all hearing lots and lots of people discussing things that they're not doing, they're non-compliance, and this is good. But we need to hear many more people discussing some more practical efforts to deal with what we're facing.
I agree with that, Mike. Maybe there's a little bit of cake and eat it there, because he did say expose the system as to what's going on, and that's something that we've always pushed. When people understand what's happening around them, then the solutions come up. I believe there's some quote, somebody used it the other day, I can't remember it exactly, but it basically said that the solution was in the problem. When you can see the problem properly, you also see the solution, and I think that's a key part of it. Why do we need to do things? The Scottish model of government is telling us very quickly. We showed this a couple of days ago, which is the Scottish government using Reaper, very low-level people inside the authorities in order to spy on the general public. They said it was a mistake that they were too low in the system. It should have been more senior people authorising the spying. But nevertheless, the spying is going on. And David, you were keen to bring in this lady. Here she is, Joanna Cherry. What is her take on the spying system in Scotland?
This is a Scottish entry into the World Hypocrisy Olympics for next year, and I think we stand an excellent chance. This is a SNP MP speaking beautifully about the fact that you cannot sacrifice privacy and get more security because it doesn't work, because it simply means that you are looking for a needle in an ever bigger haystack, and the whole system is flawed. You lose your privacy, you get nothing in return. And she's speaking here not about the named person scheme. Oh no, she's talking about the evil Westminster Snoopers Charter, not the evil SNP Snoopers Charter. So a lot of people in the No to Name Person campaign, and a lot of people on Twitter, have pointed out how utterly corrupt that viewpoint is, unless she is willing to apply it consistently. And nothing from the lady yet.
Okay, so people pointing that out over social media is a very positive thing to do. Where hypocrisy is exposed, it always seems to have a very good effect. Let's have a look into the state of the Scottish system. And of course, this man, Peter Watson, due to appear in court towards the end of the month with regard to the Heather Capital fraud scandal. You've produced some paper clippings here. They're really going for him. It's now talking about companies set up in Gibraltar. Why are we so interested in Mr. Watson? Well, of course, legal advisor to the former Procurator Fiscal Eilish Angelini, the woman who denied ever knowing anything about Holly Gregg, and Mr. Watson now embroiled in this fraud thing. What is the latest? Oh, I beg your pardon. What is the latest north of the border on this man?
Well, we're awaiting the trial, and that'll be very interesting. It'll be covered by the mainstream media, because there are certain people in the mainstream media who are not afraid of the threats from Levy McRae, from Peter Watson's new firm, PBW Law, and those people include Ben Borland at the Express, and Russell Finlay of the Sun, who was the originator of those articles that you just had on the screen. It's important to note that this Sun investigative reporter had an attempted hit on him in Glasgow at the tail end of last year, when he fought off what he described as the fat hitman, and but there was an attempt to silence him by violence. So we have to watch very carefully for attacks on brave journalists of that type, and watch very carefully what happens through our judicial system to such a well-connected and influential man as Peter Watson.
Indeed. Mike, corporate parenting, this will lead into the named person scheme, basically.
Yes, was fascinated by this little organisation. This is Who Cares Scotland. I don't know if you know them, David. Oh, sorry. This is Who Cares Scotland. I don't know if you know them, David, but this website saying more people than ever have a responsibility to make sure experienced people have the same life chances as everyone else. Corporate parents are public bodies named in law as having responsibilities to young people who are looked after and care experienced. The Children and Young People Scotland Act 2014 says that 24 public bodies have a responsibility to understand the lives of Scotland's looked after young people and respond to their needs as any parent should. And the Scottish Government funds Who Cares Scotland to provide a range of different training opportunities to corporate parents. So I just wanted to highlight that organisation sort of as a lead-in to the named person discussion.
I think it's more than 24. It's every university, it's every local authority, it's the fire brigade, it's a whole heap of organisations who have corporate parenting roles. And I would point out that if you as a child spend even a day in care, even if that is care where you remain in the family home, but you're under the nominal care of the state, then this applies to you. And it goes on until you're 26. And if you have any children before you're 26, the state will be a corporate grandparent.
Okay, well, let's...
I don't know what that means exactly yet in practice, but that's what's happening. It's a huge extension of the state's parenting role.
Well, I think we're going to be able to see a bit more of that. This is some of the information that you've produced for us today. We've got Sturgeon telling fibs, claims the named person is not compulsory, but see the legal proof below. Well, actually, we'll bring it up here on screen. So here's the actual legal proof as to what's going on.
Yes, that's the main part from Section 4 of the 2014 Children and Young People Scotland Act. That's the core of named person.
Okay, so Sturgeon lying, is that true? Telling fibs is lying, I think.
What you see there is it's very clear that the person who decides what will happen and what the degree of involvement will be the named person. It's not the parent. So the situation is the named person is in place and you cannot avoid it being in place. It's compulsory on the named person. Sturgeon says, well, parents don't have to interact. Parents don't have to have anything to do with this. What they don't say is they don't say the child doesn't have anything to do with it, because the named person will gather information on the child and there's nothing you can do to stop it as a parent. And if you decide not to engage the named person, that's a risk indicator. And that actually means more state involvement is more likely. So this is a blatant lie by Nicola Sturgeon and the whole hierarchy of the SNP. And it's been found out. It's been found out, and it's been tweeted all over the internet and Facebook and everything else. and their lies are not working.
Right. Now, I love this graphic here because it tells the story so clearly. I did think it was a bit unkind to put Nicola Sturgeon in a black hoodie, but here we are. So your parents want to leave the EU. Dad says a single police force is bad. Mum thinks wind turbines spoil the scenery. Oh dear, we'll have to re-educate your parents. Brilliant cartoon, whoever put it together. And there is something really sinister building, and Scotland is taking the brunt of it at the moment, David.
Yes, there's a lot of these on Twitter and on Facebook, and they're rather wonderful. There's the child snatcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang also features in more than a few.
Okay, and we have this one here from the Press and Journal. So we've got a school teacher having sex with a young female pupil. I've added the caption, "Don't worry, school teachers are safe named persons to look after your child." But this is the whole point of it, isn't it? The moment parents give up their rights to protect and nurture and look after their children, we've no idea who is going to
That's
be
right.
responsible for that role.
There's no safeguards, there's no checks and balances. It's all based on the idea that the state is good, the state is God, and you as a parent are a risk. That's the fundamental mindset.
Okay. Right, now, we have actually got some interesting things starting to happen around named persons. So you brought this lady up, Jo McFadden, and she is Labour, Scottish Labour, but she's offering support to the no to named persons. This has got to be good, hasn't it?
Yes, this was the photograph you see there is a shot from the Arbroath meeting, which was on Monday. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. They had to send out and get more seats. So Arbroath on the Monday night, they actually filled the hall. And in amongst the audience, there were two candidates for the Scottish elections, the Conservative candidate and the Labour candidate for this area. Both turned up and both expressed wholehearted support to the No to Named Person campaign and opposition to the whole idea of named persons and state guardians. Now, that's a considerable step up in momentum compared to where we were only a few months ago.
And if we want to be optimistic for a change, we can say, well, actually, these political personages are beginning to think for themselves. There's got to be a bit more than I'm just going to jump sides because I can get advantage from it, I think. We've got another one here, I suppose, just to give some impetus to that. We've got Beth Green. She's hoping that we can look at the named person provision again.
Yes, again, a Labour Party person here coming out. Now, unfortunately, the head of Labour in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale, supports the named person scheme. No one knows why, but she does. But here we have another candidate for Labour or Labour Party writer and blogger saying this is an attack on the working class because, and this is an intelligent and thoughtful comment because so much of this is about imposing values, and they're going to be middle class, middle road kind of Guardian reading values on every family in Scotland because the named person will not like it if your culture is different. So it's going to be about controlling culture. And one of the cultures that they will be attacking, they'll be attacking many, they'll be attacking Christian culture, they'll be attacking, I suspect, a whole lot of minority cultures, and they will be attacking working class culture. That's pretty clear.
Okay, and we've got another one here, Jenny Mara, member of the Scottish Parliament, Scottish Labour. She says she's changed her mind. And we'll just point out to people that last week, I think it was the legal case against the plans reached the UK Supreme Court, where judges heard that the plans bypass parents and that legislation is so complicated it's like wrestling with an octopus. So this is pretty outspoken stuff.
Yes, Jenny Marr is one of the up and coming people in Scottish Labour. By far, one of the most competent and coherent speakers. Like all of the rest of Scottish Labour, she voted for this, but she's had the guts to come out and say, no, that was wrong. This is wrong. We shouldn't do it. So again, that I think is quite a significant turnaround.
Okay. Now, David, you mentioned it. I've just jumped past it because I've got a little bit of an eye on the clock at the moment, but the Christian Institute indicating at the moment that the majority of people in Scotland do not support the named person scheme. Do you rate their statistics there?
There was a poll in I think the Telegraph. There was a YouGov poll, they found that of the people in Scotland, those who strongly supported the idea of named persons, 6%, those strongly opposed, 26%, and overall it was 48% opposed, 32% in favour, and 20% don't know. So you can see that the move there is the people are waking up. 26% strongly opposed is a huge figure, and we're seeing that to know this scheme is to detest it, and the arguments are being won.
Good. Well, on how do we counter these things, getting stuff out on social media in a way people can pick up on it is important. We've got Sean McCluskey here.
This is the first crack I have seen in the solid discipline of SNP and independent supporters. Now, I speak to a lot of SNP supporters and a lot of independent supporters in person and on Twitter. A lot of them don't support the named person scheme. I leafleted the SNP conference. A lot of people going in didn't support the scheme, but there's been nothing official at all. No one's broken ranks, not a single SNP politician has said this is wrong. But the first little chink in the armour here, this is a gentleman who supports independence, generates things like T-shirts with 45, meaning the 45% voted yes, still yes, independence too, IndyRef too, all of these sorts of slogans. To advocate a further independence referendum and an independent Scotland. And he's produced this badge, which has got a saltire on it, and the phrase "No to NP," no to named person. Now that's the first time that's happened, and that could be very significant, because if their own supporters start telling the SNP government this is absolutely lunacy, it's totalitarian, we don't want it, what are you doing? Eventually they might even listen. Okay,
and you've been taking your own protest, I think here with is that Gordon Brown sitting?
No, that's a frog.
Okay.
Understandable mistake there. That is a frog doing a Gordon Brown impersonation, and I love that frog because it looks so determined and it will not be moved. And I think that's what we're going. If the Supreme Court does not strike this down, the next step is for massive civil disobedience in Scotland. And no, I will not comply will be something that named persons will be hearing an awful lot.
Okay, well, named persons, we're talking about children and the safety of children. And of course, that theme is central to everything that's going on. We've got the banking scam. Close underneath it is child abuse, which of course is the way that the blackmail system works. Here's the Herald in Plymouth. We're just pointing out that what's the priority for Devon and Cornwall Police? A lady hands in a phone which says she said she found. She takes it to the police station, and very shortly she's grilled as to whether she's sort of stolen it. So this is the priority for our local police. But the Herald also boasting, of course, that we're into Child Exploitation Day. We're celebrating child exploitation, apparently. So there we are. We're saying deceit and hypocrisy because we're seeing the same old charities pushed forward. They haven't achieved child safety over 50 odd years, but they're still being promoted. Give your money to us. We're working with the police and local authorities to protect children. So in Plymouth, there's a 41% increase in child protection plans and a 14% increase in the number of children in so-called care. But of course, we know children are being abused in care. And I'm looking at Mike because when Mike and I and another lady went into Devon and Cornwall Police to report the abuse of a youngster in South Wales, we were shouted at in an extremely aggressive manner and told to get out of the interview room. So Devon and Cornwall Police seem remarkably scared of the subject of child abuse. I wonder why. Well, not to worry, because here's the gentleman heading up Plymouth's effort, and here he is reporting to ITV that children's services in Plymouth were less than good. But they're still safe, don't worry. There's a few problems, but they're still safe. And child sexual exploitation is now a shared priority for organisations working with children. And of course, it's shared with Devon and Cornwall Police. And independent Mr. Bickley, who's the independent chair of Plymouth Safeguarding Children Board, was previously a senior manager with Devon and Cornwall Police. So, David, total independence there overall.
It's almost Scottish in the way that's done there.
Well, who's behind the overall network? It's this NWG network. Hundreds, thousands of people working to protect children, consultants, experts, world leaders. We've got all this in place, but we're seeing the abuse continue, if not increase. We just thought we'd have a little look at trustees. We come to Peter Stone, who's the chair. We're fascinated. His background is with wildlife trusts. So he was the chief executive of Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, but he's now moved through the Aegis Trust and is running this huge organisation helping to protect children.
Is that because children are considered wildlife?
I don't know. Here's the Aegis Trust. You can trust them because they've got Bill Clinton involved and David Cameron. David Cameron, of course, the man who wanted to shut down the Westminster child abuse investigation. We're just going to point out here that we have been warning and warning that the integration of charities and social enterprise in society is part of big society, which is just the sort of Scottish model of government, David, that you've been warning about. Accountability just disappears out the window.
Yes, this is right. I mean, the Scottish model of government is joined up government to the ultimate degree. There are no functional boundaries. There is no such thing as confidentiality from one branch of government to the other. It's one large organism, and it views everything as part of its remit. It can't organise the economy. It kind of accepts that, but it thinks it can organise your life.
Thinks and is trying hard to do it. Well, let's just end on this. It's still on the subject of child abuse, but headline in the Daily Mail, Scotland Yard paedophile hunter is charged with groping young girl and taking indecent pictures of a child. I think there's 14 charges altogether. And this gentleman just happens to be a detective constable, Mr. Maitland, who was working with child protection in Scotland Yard, but it would appear from what's been reported that he's possibly been implicated in the very abuse he's trying to stop. So we'd asked the Met Police some time ago some questions about NSPCC, who was operating the Met Police Child Line. This was an email that we had received where a person said they worked as a temp with NSPCC in the 2000s. They saw poorly paid, not well-trained people, while the management were on very large salaries and travelling first class. And they then go on to say that they had some severe concerns about the performance of NSPCC. Well, this led us to actually ask the Met Police how they justified running NSPCC, how they had NSPCC running one of their phone lines. And they didn't want to answer that question. We asked about due diligence. The Met Police didn't want to ask. And we've now had another go at the Met Police because, of course, this policeman himself has been found still to be proven, but it would appear that something untoward has gone on. So our question is, was due diligence done of the NSPCC staff that the Met Police has used? And we've now said, has due diligence been done on the Met officers themselves? I'm not sure what sort of answer we're going to get on that. The response we had from the lady was not very helpful. We'll see what comes back. And we'll leave you on the thought that if you're worried about the future, well, don't, because in Scotland, at least, ministers are now going to be given control not only over children, but over the colleges as well. Final comment from you, David.
I would just like to finish with a nod to our Chancellor and what he's done to our economy, and to point out that when you're fighting huge odds and you're working to preserve truth and freedom against government tyranny, that it is in fact Iron Brew that will get you through.
I think that may count as advertising, but there we are. Well done. We're just going to end by saying a thank you very much to the person who kindly sent a donation to go to Anthony Carlin. That's the Northern Ireland policeman we've reported that is in prison at the moment for trying to arrest a judge he believed was breaking the law. and it appears that Anthony Carlin's police pay has been stopped. There's no tribunal to have done that, but it appears his pay has been stopped, and therefore we'd said that at the moment he could do with some assistance. So thank you very much, the person who sent that donation through. And David, you'll be delighted to know that they were Scottish pound notes. Okay, that's today's news.
Yep.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time on Monday. Have a good weekend. Do relax. Enjoy the sunshine if it's there. But of course, do something to help get the lid off this encroaching dictatorship. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Not yet.